January is the month when people feel the most energy for financial decisions. There's a fresh start, there's new information, there's new results. January is actually when I make fewer financial decisions, not more. That's because January is when the pressure to act is highest, but the quality of those decisions is not always more. So, what is wrong with January? Why does it create these bad incentives for investors? When we come to the end of the year, we're in this real overdrive of comparison. We're comparing ourselves to what our expectations was at the start of the year. We are comparing ourselves to others. It's this natural conclusion point where we're just in a more open phase for reviewing. And that year-end comparison hasn't always fully faded by the time we hit January. As we go into January, we're often in this new year narrative which creates artificial urgency. So we end up in this space where people feel both behind, but they also feel hopeful. For investors, that can be a really dangerous combination. It's this moment where people are most likely to confuse motivation with actual clarity. Urgency follows us from the old year into the new year. It doesn't disappear, it often just masks itself as optimism. And that leads to this one key behavioral mistake that action or taking action does not always equate progress. If we look at it from a purely behavioral lens, more decisions is not equal to better decisions. Often, more decisions is equal to more opportunities or chances to be wrong. When we see the steep rise in decision frequency, it doesn't always translate to improved decision quality. We know that the gap between market returns and investor returns most often comes from behavior. Multiple studies show that investor underperformance is driven by timing and activity, not necessarily asset selection. We want to take fewer decisions, but what does that actually mean? Let's start by clarifying a couple of misconceptions about taking fewer decisions. Fewer decisions does not mean disengagement. It does not mean that you're ignoring risk. It does not mean you never adjust anything in your portfolio. It means that you're taking fewer discretionary interventions. You are taking fewer reactions to changes in narrative. And overall, you are making fewer changes based on discomfort alone. Most of my decision making actually happens before January. I often do this in early December, mid-December by the latest, depending on how busy the year is. January then becomes the time where I have to execute restraint because the decisions have already been made. If we're thinking about decision impact rather than the actual frequency of decisions, in practice, that would look like I don't sit down in January to reassess everything. I've already done that. If there's something that really urgently needs to be reassessed, I will probably leave that for later in January. I don't reinterpret my entire strategy just because the calendar has changed. And I don't respond to every new piece of information as if it requires an action. If I look back at the years where I was the most active in decision making in January, those weren't necessarily my best years. Of course, there are other aspects of your life that can benefit from this urgency to act and this new energy in January, but your investing life is not necessarily the one that will benefit. And that's purely because restraint compounds quietly. Compounding needs time and it needs stability. And stability requires rules that don't reset with emotions or calendar changes. While January resets behaviors, it doesn't reset markets. And so good systems don't improve because you revisit them more often. They improve because you interfere less. Instead of making fewer decisions in January, here's what I do instead. For me, January is about observation, not action. It's when I check whether I'm still aligned in my positions or my portfolio with my long-term investment horizon and with my other life goals. I simply observe. If nothing has changed in the interaction between all of those things, I simply take it as information. Choosing not to act can be the most informed decision that you make. Very often, it's the right decision as well. While January creates an urgency to act, urgency often makes that pressure feel justified. That's why January is a good time to pause and why restraint matters the most when it comes to investing. Use the pressure of January to address or act in other spheres of your life, whether it is your health, your diet, your career, your relationships. Be quite careful with how you use that pressure in your financial and investing portfolio during January. Fewer decisions does not equate passivity, it's discipline. That's why the hardest decision in January is often to leave things alone.